Vince versus Prometheus.
Hey everybody, I am Vince of Geekvolution, and welcome to Vince Versus! That's right, me versus things. A whole bunch of things. I don't know, maybe a bear. Probably not, but maybe. So hey, welcome to Vince Versus, and today we will have a nice, gentle review of Prometheus. I don't know why it's gentle. Fighting bears is not gentle, but Prometheus. I have to say I was a little excited for this movie. I'm not a huge fanboy of the whole alien mythos, but I'm intrigued by it. I have to say that I've seen all but Alien vs. Predator Requiem, so I've seen all of the aliens and predator things in this universe. Incidentally, for those of you who want to know, I have a friend who is just dead certain that Die Hard is part of the alien and predator mythos. Apparently there's some country or company or something that is used during Die Hard. So there's a little trivia for you. I'm not sure what it is. I didn't look it up. It's not a huge deal. Anyway, it's just kind of fun. So Prometheus, I had to say, the main reason I decided I was going to go see this movie was, one, well, it's part of the alien mythos and I wanted to see it, and two, I thought the trailer that had the character played by, trusty IMDb here, the character played by Michael Fassbender, he was interesting to me. Why it's a robot crying? I like the idea of trying to bestow emotions upon a synthetic being. I think that's interesting. And I think that's, to some degree, a theme that eventually came about in the movie, although it's not a major theme, and that might have made the movie suffer just a little bit. But I'll get to that here in a minute. First of all, let's talk about some cool things. I have to say, this movie is just wet. This movie, is that a good thing? This movie is just visceral. There's one thing that I can say about a lot of alien movies is that they are disgusting in a good way, and it's not exactly gross out, or at least in my opinion, it doesn't feel like they're trying to gross you out. I feel like they're trying to make things look realistic. I mean, there's so much of the time that you'll see these beasties, and they're just clean creatures. And they're clean creatures, or maybe they're vampires that sparkle. But so much of the time, there's so much CGI that's used that they forget that these creatures need to look real. So there's a lot of just what looks tactile. It's not necessarily. I'm not saying they didn't use CGI. Obviously, they used a lot of CGI in this. But there's slime. There's things that make creatures look realistic. It's what's kind of fun to me. This stuff looks like you could touch it, and I approve of that. And another thing that ties right into that is Giger, the guy who made the original designs for Alien. It's very Giger-like. I would say Gigery, but that's hard to say. So many of the designs feel like they were made by him, and now maybe they were in the past, and I'm just not aware of it. But during the credits, near the end of the movie, or near the end of the credits, it said original designs by Giger, and I thought, well, that's kind of neat that they credited originally. And then I went, wait, he didn't make this stuff. That's interesting. So I'm assuming, based on that line, that he had limited to no role in this. I'm not even sure if the man's still alive, to be frank. But I thought it was just so, the style, the tone, it fits in the Alien universe. It fits. It's just, everything looks the way it should, and that is very pleasing to me. Something that's interesting is, one of the things that you always see in these alien movies is somewhat advanced technology. So they have these synthetic humanoids, they have these androids. This one, David, as I was calling him earlier, the gentleman whose name I have a hard time remembering, Fassbender, Michael Fassbender, he, the characters in this movie are just, to some extent, some of this technology is new, so they're looking at it as if, hey, that's really interesting. But a lot of this technology has been around for a while, and these people, there are certain people that really enjoy certain bits of technology. Like, for example, they're exploring these ruins on this faraway planet that they've traveled to, And one of these characters, whose the character's name is Fiefeld or Fiefeld, or I forget at the moment, but Fiefeld we'll call him, has these balls, these giant flying techno orbs, giant meaning about that big, that he lifts up, and after he's turned them on, they just hover and then they fly around and map this area. So I find that interesting. It can map tunnels. It just flies around and sends back a detailed map of what's there. It could even detect life, which is neat. But it's neat. But so I saw that and I thought, wow, what a cool idea. But throughout the whole movie, people are walking around going, God, how long is it going to take for these stupid orbs to map this place? And I find that interesting. I mean, one of the big compliments that was paid to Star Wars is that it's a used universe. Not all of the things look like they were just made. And then the the prequels come along and it looks like everything was just made. It's just hard to buy. Or not the prequels, sequels, whatever. I don't care what they are. I don't give a crap about the second 3 Star Wars movies, but the second set of 3. Anyway, but that's something that I find interesting, is that this technology exists and people are not exactly impressed by every little thing that comes around. They're impressed to some extent by certain bits, but anyway. The technology that they find on the planet is fascinating. So much like interesting little bits, creative things. Like, for example, and hopefully this isn't giving away too much, but for example, there will be places within these ruins that have this sort of electric slime on it. So it doesn't necessarily need a battery, it's just slime that holds a charge. And these buttons work because the slime's on there, and you just touch it and you move it around and you work the computer through this slime. I find that interesting. To some extent, I feel like there's a few wasted characters. It feels like Fiefeld and Milburn, these two characters, were put into the movie with the express intent to die. We don't get a lot about them, but of course the movie's not about them. The movie's really more about a character who is Elizabeth Shaw. She's the main protagonist in the movie. And granted, it's to some extent an ensemble piece. A lot of characters have a lot to do, and they don't all have to do with Elizabeth Shaw. But Shaw is, to some extent, she's the anchor, the point from which everybody else gets their cue. Not necessarily to say that she's in charge, but still. So Fiefeld and Milburn are there to die. We explore Shaw's past a little bit. Toward the beginning of the movie, we see that the android, David, has the ability to see the dreams of the people who are in the cryostasis. And so for those of you who don't know, this movie is about a group of people who are either archaeologists or military or hired for their scientific know-how, or actually I don't think they're military. Never mind. I feel like one of the characters played by Charlize Theron, the character, her name, I forget her first name, her last name's Vickers, her first name is Meredith. She seems very militant to me. I just assume she's military. But she's in charge of the whole ship. She's in charge of the expedition. It could just be that she's higher up on the corporate ladder, because this is funded by Wayland Industries or Wayland Corp, and also at the moment I forget Wayland something. It's funded by the main guy, whose name is Peter Wayland, played by Guy Pearce. Which I'll jump off on that for a second. Guy Pearce plays a really old man, an old man who's nearing death. Or at the beginning of the movie they say that he's probably already dead, you're just watching a hologram. But Peter Wayland is played by Guy Pearce, a young man. A young man. It's so weird. Like, why couldn't you have got an old man to play Peter Wayland? Why not? I'm not saying that they should have. Maybe they planned to use him later in another movie. Maybe he was used already in another movie. But I looked up and down on his IMDb page, and he's really only credited as Peter Wayland for this movie. So maybe they intend to use a young Peter Wayland. later and they would like Guy Pearce to play him. I don't know. Maybe that's the reason to do it. But I feel like they spent a lot of money on, or at least I would assume that they spent quite a lot of money on his makeup effects, because he looks very old. He looks pretty good. And it took me about halfway through the movie before I realized, wait, that was Guy Pearce that played Peter Weyland, because I kept wondering, when's Guy Pearce showing up? Not necessarily to say that I watched the movie for Guy Pearce. I'm not a fan of Guy Pearce, although he is a decent actor. I just kind of wondered, it's like, wait, I saw that gentleman's name. Who was he? Oh, he was the old guy. Really? He played Peter Weyland. But to some extent, Shaw's past is given a little bit... and there's a major actor. The guy played Night Owl, the major actor Patrick Wilson. He plays the father in this flashback during this dream that Elizabeth Shaw has. Patrick Wilson, maybe Wilson. Yes, Patrick Wilson. I just know a guy whose name is Pat Wilson, so I keep thinking, no, it's not his name. Is that his name? Well, I guess it is his name, and then I do it again every time. But so Patrick Wilson is slightly wasted because that guy is. He's only in the movie for one scene out of the entire movie. It was almost throwaway. He was to some extent wasted. You know, he's becoming a major actor. You know, Watchmen, Insidious, these things. He's becoming a well-known face, and I've seen him in other things. But it's so weird to me. Why hire somebody to do that? Now, granted, I feel like were I a major actor and somebody said, hey, would you like to be in a movie that's connected to the alien mythos and it is made by Ridley Scott, I would say, sign me up. I don't care if I'm only on screen for 30 seconds. I want to do this. But so I understand why you would do it. But, so there are certain things in this movie that also to some extent Weyland is wasted. You know, he's more significant than Elizabeth Shaw's father, but Weyland and Vickers, they seem like they have their moment in the movie, but there's not a lot of character development for them. They're just kind of inserted for their function, and that's, to some extent, this movie lacks a certain amount of character development. Now, the character development that we get is in Elizabeth Shaw. She's a really interesting character. She's somebody who is she's an archaeologist. She wants the big question that this movie's about is, was humanity really made by divine creation, or was it created by something else? What made humanity? And that's what this expedition to this faraway planet is to find out. So Elizabeth Shaw, throughout the movie, she's sympathetic from the outset. She's starry-eyed. She believes in her way of thinking. She believes that what they're doing is worthwhile. But of course, if you've seen the trailer, there's a lot of horror there, and or at least the trailer that involves something more than just the android David. But but Elizabeth Shaw she does have a character arc, and she does have a moment of change. To some extent, it's a little bit of an old hat character arc, moving from being starry-eyed to it's sort of a disillusionment story arc, and to some extent, the main theme of this movie is old hat. It's something that you see pretty often in science fiction. It's be careful what you wish for. It's science for science sake can be dangerous. Why? Be careful what you make, because it could come back and destroy you in a future Aliens movie. But so that's what this. It's a pretty common theme. But I got to say this. I'm using the word common. I'm using the word old hat. Guess what? I don't care. It was a well done movie. It was a well thought out movie. It was a well constructed movie, and we do have a character arc for the main protagonist, so it doesn't really bother me that these other characters get wasted a little bit. I feel like this could have been an ensemble piece. I feel like we could have had character arcs for each individual person. I feel like this movie could have been about an hour longer. I wouldn't have minded. I was entirely entertained the entire time. The one thing, there's one thing that really does bother me, and that is there are certain motivations that don't really show what they were for. There is a certain lack of motivation, and the main one that I see is in David. I'll tell you what. I'll get to that in a second. Charlie Holloway, a character who is the significant other. He's an archaeologist, and he's Elizabeth Shaw's boyfriend or fiance or whatever. I'm not certain, but I'm assuming it's just a romance and not a marriage. But so Elizabeth Shaw, or excuse me, Charlie Holloway, he just hates David. He hates the android passionately. And so I spent part of this movie thinking, I understand he's supposed to be a second-class citizen. Why would you just hate him? It just doesn't make sense to me. Why would you just hate the robot? Well, I'm assuming that that's a fairly common thing. But then I started thinking that he, being the one who hates David, is pretty interesting. Why? Because he's an archaeologist. He spends all of his time digging around in the past and trying to find significant things about a time when technology may not have been quite as prolific was the try to word. Proliferant? That's not a word. Prolific. Where maybe that's not the word I want to use. Either way, where technology was not as significant as it is now, or as it is going to be during this this future that they've created. So Charlie just hates this guy, and I find that interesting that he is a character who spends all of his time in the past. So therefore, he looks at this synthetic human. Not exactly the next step in evolution, because the synthetic human doesn't have emotions. I think that the character that David still has some sort of rationality. He still has the ability to look at the at reality and develop an informed opinion. And he's a character who is capable of opinion and capable of understanding that he should be taking offense, but not necessarily capable of really experiencing sadness or anger. I think he's a character who can understand unpleasantness, and he might want that. He might want to resolve conflicts, or at least not necessarily resolve them, but to put an end to them. We'll call it that. So therefore, Holloway is still a little. He's cruel to David. He's just always rude and inconsiderate of. It's like he feels like he can be cruel to David just because David's a robot and he won't hit. It's like internet anonymity. Exactly. So people can be trolls because they're not going to have any real life ramifications because of it. So that's interesting. He knows that insulting this robot is not going to do anything to him. But I digress. Actually, I don't digress. I'm just going to move on to another point. David does what I'm going to call sort of a malicious science experiment. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's pretty significant to the movie, but he, to some extent, I think it brings up the idea as to whether or not it would be better if this robot had emotions. Because if this robot had emotions, maybe he would have made a better choice. Maybe he would have made a choice that's more considerate of human beings, or maybe maybe he would consider himself more of an equal. You know, Ridley Scott has this. He likes to put these emotional robots into his movies. I mean, of course. Anyway, moving on. I think that it's. So those are not necessarily problems. I'm just kind of bringing interesting ideas. Now, here's the problem. David's choice doesn't actually. There's no explained motivation. Now, I'm not saying that we should have somebody jump onto the screen and say, David is doing this because of this reason, or, well, it's a good thing you did that, or, I want you to do this. So, basically, a character's motivations can be explained in a couple ways. You know, you have the expressed intent. You know, somebody says, this is the reason I want you to do this. You know, somebody's following orders, or that person has an ulterior motive, or whatever. But the other way that I can see maybe there's another way, but the other way that I've been thinking is that a character's motivations are truly come to light when you see the benefit of the action. Now, this malicious science experiment, or what I'm calling a malicious science experiment, is it doesn't actually show anything that this guy intended to do. Now, maybe he intended it. Now, I think, actually, I feel like it was intended for a specific line that's in the movie, and I'll give you a spoiler warning if you don't want to hear the line, but I'll give you that in a minute. But, well, I'll give it to you now. Spoiler warning. So here's what's so interesting and why I think that this movie is really, or this is what explains David's choices. This is what explains so many characters' choices in this movie. David asks Holloway why humanity created the android, the synthetic being that David is. And Holloway's response is, just because we could. That's why we did it, because we can. And we can, so we did. And that really explains, in my head, that's the reason that David did what he did. That's the reason that he conducted this experiment. So I find that interesting, and I can't really condemn the movie for it because I feel like it's giving you something to read into. I know that there are certain things that are unexplained in this movie, and I believe it's a problem, but I don't really care that much because I was still entertained, and I still feel like I can explain it. I feel like I can come up with a reason, but there is not enough information in the movie to give me reasons for what happened. And it's just difficult to try to reconcile these issues. As I said, I enjoy it. I can find a way to explain it away, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right. And what that means is that the movie is lacking a little bit of explanation. So therefore, I feel like this movie could have been a little bit longer. Really, I feel like after the main story arc in this movie is over, you have a little fun piece that connects it into the alien universe, that really connects it into the alien universe, and that's right there before the credits. And the trouble is that a lot of these unexplained motivations seem to be leading up to that. These unexplained motivations seem to be expressly done so that that could happen, but that really doesn't tell you enough. Why would you want that to happen? Just because you can. So that's the only way that I can really. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, you're like, what are you talking about? And for those of you who have seen the movie, you're like, oh, okay. You're stupid, Vince. No, that's not right. But yeah, I think my final note I'm not going to talk about because I've gotten through this whole review without mentioning that thing's existence. So I'm just going to let it be. So thanks for watching Vince Versus, guys. Tune in next time when I fight something else. I'll be fighting on Vince Versus!